All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started, and welcome to the ADU Wealth Mastery. This is our Five Secrets series webinar. This morning's topic is going to be a very interesting topic, and it's on the ADU valuation. What is the value of an ADU? Turns out that it's not as easy as people thought, and it's getting a little bit more complicated with all the noise in the industry. I'm going to draw your attention to the screen, and you've got a QR code and a link there. You can grab either one of those. John can put them in the chat room. If you hit those links, you can join the membership platform absolutely free for life. We're waiving the annual subscription fee of $4.97, so you can join for free. There's a lot of cool stuff, a lot of ebooks, a lot of our Taxing Times magazine. Lots of cool information, and obviously copies of the videos that we're doing. Every other week, we're doing another live webinar on our entire series of the marketplace in the ADU market. What we're going to do this morning is dig in and dive in to the issue of valuation. There is just an extreme amount of confusion, particularly here in California, about how do you value an ADU? And as a valuation analyst, as an expert in valuation, I can tell you that an appraisal is not the same as a valuation, an evaluation study. They're completely different things, and they're used for completely different reasons. More and more lenders are looking to valuation because of the character of the property having transformed or changed from primary residential to hybrid or multifamily. You get a different, you have a whole different platform in terms of what value should look like in appraisal. So we're going to explore that this morning and get into the weeds on each of these five components. I do want to mention, and I'll come back and visit it again, in California, Assembly Bill 1033 allows an owner to sell their ADU separate and apart from their house. So if you have a house and you built an ADU, you can sell your ADU separate. Make sure that you understand that there are significant tax implications when you do that. So you probably want to do some tax planning or modeling before you do that. And also AB 68 will allow you to at least build at least two ADUs on a lot in California. You can build a regular ADU and a junior ADU. And in some jurisdictions, you can get as many as 5 ADUs on a lot. This is going to change the real estate industry, and I spoke about this back in 2010. If you go back and look at any of the stuff that I was producing back then, I was telling everybody in 2010, that's 15 years ago, that this ADU thing was going to be a big deal, and it's a big deal. By the way, I was also talking about Bitcoin. In 2010, as of yesterday, for the first time, a programmer ordered 2 pizzas and paid for those 2 pizzas to be delivered with Bitcoin back in 2010. Yesterday was the 15th anniversary of that. And he used 10,000 Bitcoin to buy those 2 pizzas and have them delivered. Those 10,000 Bitcoin today are worth $1.1 billion. Those same Bitcoin today are worth 1.1 billion. I was telling everybody back in 2010, back in 2015 about Bitcoin. I was telling everybody about the real estate market. I was telling everybody about ADUs. So I'm just saying, we got into the Bitcoin, we got into the ADUs. The market is changing radically. And this is a book you should add to your library right here, upside. You should buy this book, read it, and then when you're done reading it, read it again. Kenneth Gronbach. The population shift and trend of the generational groups is radically transforming the marketplace. And most people aren't even aware of some of the structural changes that are going on. ADUs is a big deal, and it's going to get even bigger. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 secrets to ADU valuation that nobody tells you. And these are 5 components. Now, there's a whole list of other things. These are probably the 5 most important things, because in order to figure out what the value of your ADU is, we have to figure out the kind of ADU that you have. And unfortunately, right now, we're kind of in the wild, wild west, because there's just all kinds of different hybrid uses that people are using or coming up with. And the counties and the cities that are regulating this, particularly here in California, are trying to get some uniform application. That's starting to work. But right now in California, we have about 110,000 approved ADU units in California. That's going to radically change. And it's going to radically change nationwide as well because of the housing shortage. And that's not going to be something that goes away overnight. Right now, by 2027 nationwide, we will be looking at 500,000 ADUs being built per year by the time we get to 2027. That's the annual amount nationwide. We know where the top 20 cities where those changes are going, or counties. But I can tell you that the 110,000 ADU units that we have in California, by 2030, that's going to be 350,000 or more, maybe even more. It is transforming the real estate industry. And if you're a real estate professional, you should really pay attention, because if you don't have this in your cadre of tools in your tool belt, the industry is going to leave you behind. And it's changing that fast right now. What we want to do is understand the components that make up valuation. As a tax expert, as an enrolled agent, admitted to practice before the IRS, I've been doing this work for over 40 years. As a valuation analyst, as a valuation expert, I've been dealing with ADUs for probably 20 years. Back in the day, we called them granny flats or mother-in-law quarters. Same thing. It's just an add-on to an existing single-family residence of another residence or dwelling, except now you can create its separate parcel number and you can sell it separate and apart from your house. So it's going to change how we do real estate. It's already changing that quite a bit. We have this gap in value because we don't have a consistent approach in terms of the approach to value. Basically, people are using one of the least reliable sources, and that's an appraisal method or market comp method. That's what lenders are accepting, but I can tell you that it's not reliable. The average ADU that we look at is undervalued by at least $100,000 or more, and it's undercharging rent by at least 30% or more, because people don't understand the rent component and they don't understand rent modeling. So shockingly, you can have 2 or 3 varied values on an ADU. And after a 5-year holding period, an owner could discover that they've lost $140,000 to $200,000, not only in value, but in lost income, because they're pricing the rent in a model based on market comps, which is the most unreliable, particularly for an ADU, to use. What if the market comps that you're using are on a race to the bottom and just trying to discount, and you don't know the background of that? Well, then you're just going to get to the bottom faster. There's actually a scientific approach to rent modeling for an ADU, and you want to do a couple of things before you start looking at how much to charge for the rent, to find out what the rent capacity or the saturation rate in your particular area. We can tell you from the software that we've got, if you're in 92115, we can tell you how many ADUs are in 92115, and we can tell you the saturation rate, what an ADU should rent for. And it's generally about 25 to 30% more than what you think it is. So any zip code in the country, we're able to do that with our software. The other thing that I think is most important are the factors that are going to control the value. These are the factors that are going to control the value of of the ADU. The type of ADU that you have, which we're going to get into in a minute, and its classification, what class is it in? The rent that you charge, not so much the dollar, but the rent model. There's a rent model for ADUs. I think there's 5. If you're using the wrong rent model, you're undervalued because the value of your ADU as a rental property is going to be based on a gross rent multiplier. And if you're charging rent below market, even if you use a higher gross rent multiplier, you're still going to get a lower number because your rent is below market level. And then you're giving up, some cases, over $100,000 in value. The tenant profile that you're choosing, which is going to be proximate to the kind of rent that you're doing. This is a big deal because people mistakenly think this is like an apartment, and it's not. This is a very different hybrid use, and you don't want to use the same rationale for your ADU that you're using for your 5 units because it's not the same kind of property. So value is going to come down to these factors, and then you're going to have financial attributes and tax attributes, which I'll talk a little bit about today. These are the things that are going to drive the biggest part of that value equation. How you determine the value is, first we've got to look at the use, and we go through that process and understand that we're not talking about the price. We're talking about value. If you want to talk about replacement value, if you want to talk about insured value, we're talking about the value, which has nothing to do with the price. You're taking a single family residence and now converting it to a multifamily home with an ADU. So its character, its use and character are changing. Its character from a single family to multifamily, and its use from a primary residence to income producing. Now you have a tax attribute and a financial attribute that changed both the use and the character of the property, and it's going to affect your property taxes. It's going to affect your income taxes. It's going to affect your social insecurity. It's going to affect your retirement. It's going to affect every financial decision that you're making because you're collecting income from this property now that used to be principal primary residence. And now it's income producing, multifamily, or hybrid at a minimum. So these are the things that are going to make the difference when we're talking about value and why you want to know what that value is. We then get into these 5 characteristics which frame the 5 secrets: the property's character and use, the type of ADU, the class of ADU, the rent modeling that you're using for the ADU, and the proximity factors of the ADU. Proximity analysis is something that has been very important in real estate since the late 1800s when metropolitan cities were being planned out. The gentleman, or a couple of gentlemen academics that came up with this whole analysis on proximity analysis, these are how cities are planned out. Well, that same rationale works today. The only difference is we have an AI tool that we've developed that lets us look into a zip code and do a proximity analysis on a piece of real estate or a business and tell us things that you can't find in the marketplace. And this is particularly important when it comes to ADUs because our proprietary techniques give us an insight into not only the value, but the advantage that that owner could have in their particular business or in their particular piece of real estate. And that's an exceptional edge that a real estate professional could have or an owner could have. Let's talk about the type of ADU because the problem starts right here in understanding that there are different types of ADUs. These different types are going to decide its class. The class of the ADU is going to influence its rent modeling, and the rent modeling will affect value because you're using a gross multiplier. So we want to understand the type of ADU first before we get into the class, because class is defined by the type. And the problem is that we first must identify the type and have some uniform approach across the industry. So we're using the same industry model that lenders use, that appraisers use, that the cities and the counties use when they're giving you permits. We're looking at all the market conditions, all the special features that might be part of your ADU, and we're pulling all of that out and extrapolating that out to understand your ADU is unique, but how unique is it in terms of its value? So the first one is the ADU that is a conversion of an existing interior space. Let's say a bedroom and a bathroom, or maybe a basement within the home. And so this conversion is a particular type of ADU. It gives us some value considerations, and it tells us a little bit about appraisers that may want to use a rent income multiplier, a GRM, gross rent multiplier. But I'm going to tell you that the rent multiplier, at least the times that we've looked at these on appraisals, is undervalued and understated because they're using the wrong basis. They're using rent comps. Rent comps are not reliable when it comes to an ADU. They're not. And it's not the same as renting a 5-unit or a 10-unit. They're not the same. Different economic factors govern this. And so mistakenly, when you peel back the onion and you look at the detail of the appraisal, the appraiser is a good appraiser. He or she's doing a great job, but it's not a reliable outcome in terms of the appraisal report to tell you what the value should be or what the rent should be on that particular ADU. One of the differences that bring this one to bear, it's the easiest one to do, but it has sort of the lower end of the spectrum in value because of the issue of privacy and shared walls and shared space, even if it has a separate entrance. So those are the factors that we look, even if it has its own dedicated kitchenette and its own bathroom or a full kitchen, it still has a shared wall. So unless you have soundproofing and some other features or amenities that would mitigate that, it's going to score on the lower side of the value spectrum. Take a garage conversion. Now, the garage conversion is in two parts. It's either an attached garage or detached. Either one, you have to know, because both of those are going to have different factors that influence the value. These are viewed more favorably because, unlike an interior conversion, the structure is somewhat detached or separate, doesn't have a shared wall, usually. And if we're removing usable garage space and converting it, then there's a cost to that you're not looking at, that when your property tax assessment comes, you should be arguing that so that your property tax bill doesn't go up, and nobody thinks to do that. Property tax assessors love it because they get to get more money. Appraisers may consider this a low to mid-tier ADU, depending on the quality and the amenities that are being offered. Then we have the new build ADU. This is a newly constructed ADU that's connected to the primary residence. Typically, it's built on to an add-on to an exterior wall. In terms of valuation considerations, it's a higher perceived value due to new construction. It has separate systems, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, generally sub-metered. If not, it should be, because that's going to give you significant increase in value. And although cap rates are not reliable for investment analysis on an ADU, it will yield a better cap rate generally than a typical rental income potential based on a conversion. It is more readily seen as income producing asset when you have this type of an ADU, because the value, the rent proximity, and income analysis and investment analysis are going to be more traditionally more like a 5 or 6 unit or even a 3 unit property. Valuation incorporates a cost approach, an income approach, and a sales comparison approach. And then we add one thing to that that's proprietary to our system that we use that appraisers don't have access to in our software that's basically supported by AI. We go into that proximity analysis and that rent modeling, and we can tell the owner over a 5-year holding property period, we can tell the owner basically the potential of lost revenue and identify those weaknesses so that you don't find out 5 years from now you lost $200,000 that you didn't know about. So it's got a lot of value on that regard. The next in our list of types of ADUs are those that have pre-approved plans. And you're seeing this more and more across the country, here in California, especially in San Diego, LA County. The counties have adopted pre-approved plans. The state has adopted these. These are expedited permits. They generally take less time because they're pre-approved sets of plans. Permitting goes a lot smoother. And it keeps the supply cost much more manageable. You're going to get a higher appraised value and you're going to get a higher valuation value with these pre-approved plans just because of these streamline effects. There's a lower perceived risk to a future buyer, and more readily, it's easily to check off the compliance and code compliance stuff that's part of the due diligence when we're looking at valuation. It also gives enhanced resale appeal, especially in incorporated municipalities like the city of San Diego or Del Mar, places like that, because this streamlines the construction process and brings those costs in line to be a lot more reasonable. The next is a new build ADU, and this is a standalone structure that's on the same lot as the primary residence. And this particular ADU has some unique characteristics that start increasing that value a lot more. It's going to get one of the highest valuation increases because of full separation from the main home. You have privacy and functionality equal to a small standalone rental property. It's going to have the broadest in tenant market appeal, and it's often going to be treated by an appraiser as a separate rentable dwelling unit, like a 2-on-1, or maybe like a duplex, allowing for full income capitalization in the value, plus the construction cost. While they're going to be a little bit higher, you're probably going to get a higher resale and you're probably going to get a higher rent because of the features of being a separate unit, even though it's on the same lot. So those are going to give you the stronger indicators toward a higher value. And then you have a detached new build with pre-approved plans. This is probably at the highest end of the spectrum in value, in that these pre-approved plans are streamlined, standardized building plans, permitting process. For valuation consideration, the benefits, we get the same structural advantages as the custom detached ADU, but because it's pre-approved, we don't have all of that bureaucracy that we have to be concerned with. And it's going to get valued slightly higher than custom because it's going to have a lower risk factor because of those pre-approved plans. It's not as risky than if you custom designed your own and then you've got all this extra layers of bureaucracy. Then you have to do the due diligence. Were there any exceptions that were granted in the permitting? Did you sign any exceptions for low income rent? Those are things that can detract from value. So once we have the understanding that the type of ADU that we're talking about, we want to then look at the class. And the easiest way that I can tell you to look at the class of the ADU is once the type has been defined, the class is already defined, and it's sort of like an RV. You can buy a class A plus RV. Those things are like huge hotels on wheels. They're huge, and They start around $250,000 and up to a Class D plus RV that you see parked in somebody's driveway, which is basically like a big pickup truck with a camper shell. So you have different classes of RV. A D doesn't make it bad, it just makes it different. And a Class A plus is different. It gives you a price range and it gives you the kind of RV that falls into these classes. And so ADUs are very similar in the sense that, at least in our valuation experience, when we're looking at ADUs, once we understand the type, we understand the class. And the class is really what we're looking at, because it's that enhanced classification that's going to give us the extra bump in value that the owner wasn't even aware of. Just a small cosmetic thing that you do in the design to the bathroom or to the kitchenette could be worth 20x. In other words, you put $10,000 and it's worth 20x of that in value, because it translates into economic value. So these little things, when you're designing your ADU, are really important features and benefits that translate into money and value when you get ready to sell or you get ready to rent. So we have these 6 classes, from the C class to the A plus class. And then we take that property type and class, and then we model that so we can understand, with those features and benefits, we're starting to narrow down how we're going to assess the value of this particular ADU property and let the owner know what the value is. The hierarchy is very similar to the ones that we just looked at in the type. Your C class is an interior conversion. Your A plus is a pre-approved detached. And anywhere in between, adding amenities, features, and benefits like sub-meters is a huge feature and benefit. To have sub-meters for your plumbing, for your water, your electric, those sub-meters, they're a little bit more expensive to put them in. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to get 10x in value. If it costs you 20 grand to do that, you're going to get $200,000 back in some translated value, because you've done that over, let's say, a 5 or 6 year holding period. The detached new build, you have to be a little bit careful, but I'm going to tell you it has the highest lift in value in rent, because it's the one that's overlooked the most. And everybody misses these common characteristics. We don't miss these things. When we go out and we look at it, we actually go out and kick the dirt and make sure that it's there, number one. And number two, we're looking for these little cosmetic things, because each one of those boxes that we check, we're adding thousands of dollars to value and hundreds of dollars to rent that the owner didn't even realize. So what if I told you that there's an even bigger gap in the ADU that impacts both value and income, and that's in your rent modeling? In other words, how did you decide, or how did your client decide how much to charge for rent for the ADU? Surprisingly or not, the most common answer is that they looked on apartment.com or one of these sites, and they tried to find something similar to that. That's a market comp or market comparable. And they came in maybe a little bit below that, or maybe just a little bit above that. And that's what they rented. And surprisingly or not, we learned that the owner says, you know, what was crazy is we got like 20 people applied for it and we had no problem renting it out. Well, here's the bad news. The reason that you didn't have any problem renting it out is you're probably 30% below the market. It's the cheapest out there. And yes, you're going to have people standing in line to rent it because they can't find a comparable that should be used. And so you're the cheapest deal on the street when your rent should be 30% higher. And we see that a lot. Lost income is lost value. Not all ADUs are equal when it comes to rent. And again, the traditional thinking is that, well, it's like a duplex or it's like a triplex or it's like a 5 unit. No, it's an ADU. It's a hybrid use and it has a higher value and a much higher rent value than a 5 unit apartment building. We have a 5 unit apartment building, and I can tell you the ADU is much more valuable than the 5 unit apartment building. Let's talk about the types of rent. You have STR, short term rental. You have two kinds of STR. You have the short term rental, 7 days or less, Airbnb, 30 days to 8 days or less. That's kind of like an Airbnb. And those are short term rentals. A lot of jurisdictions have restrictions on your ADU being able to be rented on a short term rental basis. 30 days or less, most jurisdictions in California prohibit that. But 31 days and more is a different can of beans. These are short term occupancy, STO rent models. An STO rent model is radically different than renting it to a tenant in a 5 unit apartment building. We're looking at traveling executives. We're looking at traveling military contractors. We're looking at traveling senior officers in the military for temporary duty assignments. We're looking for traveling physicians, traveling nurses, pediatricians, anesthesiologists. There's a whole industry out there that get per diem, and the per diem on rents are usually 25 to 40% higher than what your tenant would pay you if you're doing a 6-month lease. And I would never, as an investor, I would never do a 6-month lease on an ADU, month to month. And I would probably be looking at short-term occupancy. 30 to 75 days are the typical assignments because you're going to get the highest amount of rent possible in the shortest amount of time once we do a tenant profile. And we can tell you from a tenant profile the ideal tenant in any zip code in the country. Long-term leases are 180 days or more. Long-term leases, and they get discounted. So if your ADU has a 1-year lease and it's producing $25,000 and you had no vacancy factor, we're going to discount that $25,000 by 10%. Because long-term leases are not the highest and best use for the property. The highest and best use is short-term occupancy. And so we're going to discount the value by 8 to 10%. Hybrid rents, personal and business rents, and family member rents, I'm going to get into in those details because these are other kinds of rent models. And the rent model that you're using will absolutely determine the base upon which the value is going to be determined, because that's where we're going to go to apply an enhancement or a discount factor in using a gross multiplier. Short-term rentals, again, like the Airbnb, for financial and tax attributes, it makes a difference if it's 7 days or less, or if it's 8 to 30 days. And believe it or not, the tax code defines this out. And what you're going to be able to do in taking advantage of all of the tax attributes, if you're doing short-term rents in this one of these two models, you're going to have different tax outcomes. And probably your tax person doesn't know that. Short-term rents have a different impact on valuation and vacancy rates because you have to use those numbers to normalize the disparity. And we have to come in and adjust those to normalize them in a valuation, so that the ADU you could literally, in some areas in San Diego, you could literally get $4,000 a night for an ADU. If you were close to the arena and Taylor Swift was coming into town for a concert, $4,000 a night, no question. You'd get $4,000 a night, no question. So we look at proximity analysis and sensitivity factors that tell us that if you're in an entertainment hub, you might have greater value than you realize because you're discounting are not taking into consideration some of these enhanced values that are going to give you more rent. Short-term occupancy, these are usually 45 to 180 days. The typical that we see a lot is 75 to 90 days. This is like a traveling nurse. Traveling nurse is going to come out, going to be working at Grossmont for 90 days on a TDY assignment. She's got a per diem, he's got a per diem of X dollars, and they're going to rent and pay your rent in advance and book that for that period of time. If you have some amenities like a housekeeper and a meal service and a couple of other things that don't cost you very much to put in place, you're going to actually get another 15% more in rent if you add these other features and benefits to this rent model. LTL, long-term lease, 180 days to 365 days. I've actually seen somebody sign a lease for an ADU for 2.5 years. I would never have done that, but it's sort of like the investor that says, I haven't raised my rents on my tenants because they're good tenants for 3 years, because they're good tenants. Yet you're taking a discount of at least 8% a year, and your property is going down in value, not up in value, because you're charging lower rent. It's an investment. Its highest and best use is to make money. And it's your property, but I'm going to tell you, our job is to tell you all the options that you have so you can make an intelligent decision. LTL rents have a different impact on valuation, and we have to build in, unless you have 5 years of rent history, we have to build in at least a 6 to 7% vacancy factor to normalize the rents for a vacancy factor. LTL rents generally are not favored because of the discounting factor, because it violates the most basic tenet of highest and best use for the property to get the highest rent. A hybrid rent situation is a mixed term basis, generally from 90 to 120 days, designed for specific target tenants like executives. You make a deal with Quantum XYZ company, and their executives are going to use your ADU for the next 2 years. And so they put you under contract. They negotiate with you each time that they come out and send an executive out. They're going to stay at your place, and they're going to negotiate a floating rate on the per diem for travel or a government contractor. And there are places where you can list your property and take advantage of these, and they pay extraordinarily well in terms of what you want to look at. And if you have this kind of rent model, you're going to get a much higher valuation, both in terms of the value of the property as well as the income. Hybrid rents have a different impact on valuation because the proximity analysis and saturation analysis are critical to understanding the core value is going to be based on the uniqueness of that contract or that tenant. And that's a big deal that drives a lot of that value. Personal or business rent. Personal or business rent or lease is the rent for the ADU on a personal business basis, generally for your own corporation, either as a business office, a corporate office, or some other controlled related party use, where your corporation is paying you under an accountable reimbursement plan the equivalent of fair market value rent, but you don't have to claim the rent as income because of the tax attributes, because of the related party. You can rent it out 14 times a year for $20,000. Corporation can write off $20,000, and you don't have $20,000 of income that you have to report for the ADU, for the rent. So this gets into, and this is why we're tax experts, this gets into modeling the rent in a way that might give you some other advantages, because if you have a business, you might want to look at this opportunity to harvest a lot of the financial and tax attributes, because the tax savings would probably pay for half of the cost of the ADU in less than 5 years. Personal and business rents have different impacts on valuation. You actually, in some cases, could get a higher valuation if you're using it for a business and another business owner was to buy the property and do the same thing. You can model that for that business owner. And we've got those models. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of deals get made because of the tax attributes once you can understand how to make those work. Family member. Family member rents or leases are the rent of the ADU on a personal family member basis, and could be the ADU is going to be treated as a medical facility for an aging parent. Well, you got a whole section of the tax law that allows that ADU to be written off all 100% as a medical facility if you meet certain conditions. And this could be for long-term care, treatment care, recovery, an aging family member, dementia. All of these things fall under that umbrella, and your ADU is no longer an ADU. Your ADU is a medical facility. And you get a medical deduction in terms of, well, you get two different kinds of deductions, but you get a much greater deduction if you're using it for this use. What we have to do as valuation and tax experts is we have to normalize some of that because it is so high, the tax benefits are so great. We have to normalize that, bring it back into the world of reality. And by normalizing that, we make the adjustments because not everybody that would buy your property would have the same or similar circumstance. And so we have to normalize that out a little bit. But I can tell you on an individual basis, if you've got the right set of facts, this is like a home run in the bottom of the ninth with the bases loaded. This is just a grand slam. Most tax experts and accountants are not going to know this, and it's been on the law books for at least 30 years. I've been doing taxes for over 40 years, so I know it's been there for at least 30. But Section 213D of the Internal Revenue Code is the section of the tax law that allows, and it's not some crazy loophole. All a loophole is a tax strategy that somebody educated you about. It's not a loophole. It's a highly effective tax strategy to turn your ADU into a mixed use medical facility and get a tremendously valuable deduction for taking care of a parent or a family member under any one of 5 or 6 different circumstances. Even a child with certain recognized medical conditions, ADHD, it could qualify under those treatment plans. The ADU treated as a healthcare facility deduction under 213. This one client converted a $65,000 ADU conversion into a $49,000 medical expense deduction in the first year. In other words, the cost to convert for everything was 65 grand. The write-off in the first year was $49,000. The tax savings was $25,000. So $25,000 of the cost of the $65,000 was paid for in the first year just by taking advantage of this deduction. Now, these are things, and this is a very, very short list. I mean, I've got a 2-page list of stuff that this includes. I'm just giving you some high points here. When we look at the ADU, we're looking at other features and benefits under the amenities, and we're looking at any amenities, green energy, solar, electric vehicle, battery charger, sub-metering, maid service. Like my wife and I have a 5-unit over on Mohawk. We've got a maid service for our tenants. We got laundry delivery service for our tenants. We built, they don't pay for utilities, gas, sewer, water, trash. Everything's included in one price. And our rents are 28 to 30% higher than market comps in that area for 92115. But we give them everything. And our ideal tenants are traveling nurses, government contractors, and PhD students at San Diego State. We love those tenants because we give them everything and we get one price, and it's just crazy. Laundry service is a big deal. Doesn't cost you much to set it up. There are dozens of features and benefits that you can add on and make available that the tenant pays for, but you just make it available. Free Wi-Fi, free internet, all of this. Laundry room. We give them the slugs for the quarters so that they don't have to pay the quarters for the machine. So it's free laundry. All of these features and benefits give us more rent than what we were getting. When we bought that 5 years ago, the annual rents were $70,000. We're collecting $130,000 a year now based on these amenities. And we're turning two of them into short-term occupancy. And then we're going to be adding an ADU to it. And it's just a crazy deal. You can turn this property into a gold mine if you got the right kind of strategy laid out.